In the world's battle against climate change, does the solution lie not here on the ground, but can it be found in space? My guest this week thinks so. She is an aerospace engineer who left Trinidad and Tobago at the age of 17, born and raised right here. But she also believes small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago will one day join the space race in some way, form or fashion. My guest this week is Camille Wardrop Alleyne. Camille Wardrop Alleyne, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
How does it feel to be back home after all these years? You did visit in 2019, but it's been a few decades since you've been back.
Not decades, a few years. It's always great to be home, really. This is the place of my birth. This is the place of my formative years, and it's really always nice to see it as an adult.
You left here at 17. Mm-hmm. What do you make of the T&T that you've come back to?
It's a little different, a lot more development. I think the lifestyle is a lot different from when I grew up here in the 70s and the 80s, but it's still a beautiful place.
Yeah. You, in between those decades, you have spent your life building an astronomical, no pun intended, career when it comes to aerospace engineering. You've gone on to hold several portfolios at NASA,
yes.
A company that a lot of engineers would love to even be an intern at. Those years, what did those years mean to you, to your career coming from a small island?
So it's important to know where my dream for working at NASA started. I left Trinidad to study engineering. Actually, I started to study aeronautical engineering. I was really fascinated by planes, so I wanted to learn how to design planes. And that, in my first year of college, the Space Shuttle Challenger accident happened. This is 1986. At that moment, my whole world changed. My whole world opened up. I didn't know there was a place called NASA. I didn't know there was this thing called a space shuttle. And I didn't know there was actually a job called being an astronaut. And it was in that moment that I decided that's what I want to do. I want to design planes. I want to work for NASA. And so I shifted my studies to focus on aerospace, to focus on things like propulsion system design, airframe system design. And it was 6 years after that NASA had offered me my first role as a flight systems test engineer at NASA Kennedy Space Center. So being there and having this dream of being there and seeing the space shuttle and working on it was far beyond my wildest dreams. And to look back now on a 29-year career, I'm now retired, but to see all the opportunities that I've had, all the amazing programs that I've gotten to not just work on as an engineer, but work on as a leader and a manager has been beyond, you could not tell me this was going to happen.
In 3 decades, a day at NASA really moves things really forward.
Yeah.
The industry has really progressed,
It has.
and it's fascinating to see how the technology itself has gotten so much easier, so much more accessible. Compare your time now in retirement to when you had just started, and how easily accessible space is becoming.
I wouldn't say the technology is easier. Space is still very hard. Building rockets are really hard. What has changed is our strategy towards what we call the democratization of space. How do we open up space to not just very wealthy governments, but to emerging countries, to developing countries, to private sector, right? And so NASA kind of created this strategy around public-private partnership where we invested in private sector capabilities and became a customer of those private sector. So SpaceX is a perfect example of that. They did not just arrive on the scene.
But as someone who has spent their life's work doing this. Do you fear that space, something that you guys work, as you call it, democratization, is becoming politicized?
Space has always been politicized, and it will continue to be politicized. It is where I think governments see a vantage point of where they can have a domain or primary domain. And so from that perspective, governments are always going to see space as politicized, as the domain of defense, even though NASA is a civil, peaceful uses of space organization. There's always the defense side with China, with the U.S. Defense
India
Department.
has joined the space race?
Yes, exactly. The new space race, right? And so it's always going to be politicized.
You yourself will one day like to venture into space. Do you see that happening?
Absolutely, very soon, because now you could buy a ticket. Not everybody could buy a ticket. It's still very expensive, but we talked about the fact that aviation at some point was at this place in the beginning where very few people could buy a ticket to go to transatlantic, go from, say, the US continent to Europe, right? It was very expensive and very few people could afford it. The way you drive down cost is having competition, right? So as more airlines came online, then people had choices, right? And you want to get a bigger market share, so you drive your costs down. And as you drive costs down, more people are able to afford it. And that is the trajectory of what is going to happen with space being accessible to more than just billionaires.
Coming up next, will humans ever inhabit another planet?
Even though the technology is ready to go to Mars, is the human body ready to go to Mars, right? Is the human body ready to sustain such a journey?
Only a matter of time, you're
It's
saying,
only a matter of time.
before
It's only a matter of time.
traveling to space becomes like air travel.
For sure. For sure.
Is the world ready for something like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know there are a lot of countries. I believe over the next 10 years, every country is going to have some kind of involvement or participation in space. It may not look like NASA in the US. It may not look like sending astronauts to the moon, right? That is probably going to be a smaller subset of countries. But using space technology, for example, for solving problems here on Earth is something that so many countries, developing, emerging markets, are seeing as valuable and something that becomes critical to sustainable development.
I'm glad that you said using the space technology and the knowledge of space to confront some of the issues here at home. When we talk about the Earth, one of the biggest challenges at the moment is climate change.
Yes.
And you have spent a large chunk of your career now in your business. You seek to use the knowledge that you have, to use the technology that you've learned to use to combat climate change.
So when people think about space, I think, especially in the emerging world, they look at what NASA has done, sending probes to other planets. You know, the James Webb Space Telescope that could look, to the beginning of the cosmos and the universe. And what we don't think about is how space is a vantage point to look at Earth and to study our home planet. And so that's what we've been able to do. The technologies, the satellites are becoming so much more advanced, so much more sophisticated, and you're able to measure things like climate, the weather. You're able to predict the weather patterns. You're able to measure things like gas emissions, right, that we know may be contributing to the warming of the planet. And so there are all these sensors and technologies that we're able to use now to inform us on what is happening with our home planet. And then what do policymakers and decision makers do with the data that we get from these sensors? How do you form policy? How do you change behavior, right? That is the next step.
Right. For small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago and those across the Caribbean, how can this revolutionize their fight? Because these nations are on the front line of this climate fight.
Yes, since the Caribbean is one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world, and you talk about vulnerabilities of these small islands with the warming of the planet, the warming of the oceans, we see the hurricanes becoming more intense. And so how do we use these technologies, one, to predict, to model these weather patterns, right? And then how do we put policies in place to make sure that we're reacting if there's a disaster coming, moving people, fortifying structures and systems. And so that is the work that we need to do with the new technologies and data, the influx of data that we have. And now with things like AI and machine learning, deep learning techniques and tools, we're able to process all of this data in so much more volume and in such a more informative way, right?
I'm glad that you pointed out all of the examples of how the technology and knowledge can enhance our climate fight. But one of the common themes when it comes to climate change here in the Caribbean and small island developing states is the finance required to access that technology, to access that knowledge. And that's why, in particular, regions like ours are still so far behind.
That's such a great point. It's really the lack of financial resources that sometimes is a barrier to us being able to use these technologies. But I know there are a lot of consortiums around the world and nonprofit organizations, global organizations that are providing access to this data for free, open source. There's a lot of satellite data that is open source, right? And so what you need now is specialists, scientists, geoscientists, who could take that data and analyze that data to inform policies.
Yeah. Talking about the work that you've done in aerospace engineering, you've had a unique view of the world. Does it sometimes disappoint you what the Industrial Revolution has and is doing to the world?
No, I think I am very hopeful because as we advance more technologies, right? I believe we are improving the quality of our lives around the world. And so I am very hopeful about all the advancements. I know people are worried because there is a transformation. We're moving away from more manual, hands-on to more automation, robotic types. And I think there's an opportunity to train new skills, train our workforce in new skill sets to be able to adapt to the change in technology. And so I think there's opportunity here.
Let's talk about opportunities. In your field of endeavor, and I'm smiling because it's a tricky question to ask, but do you feel one day that humans will be able to inhabit another planet?
Yes.
And live as though we have lived on it?
I mean, it's going to take some time. I don't know if it's going to happen in my lifetime, but I think we're moving towards that. I think as space travel becomes more accessible, I mean, I think we can do it. We do have some challenges to overcome. We talk about, is the technology maybe ready to go to Mars, for example? Mars is a planet that looked like Earth, and it had an atmosphere, and we know there's water on the subsurface of Mars, so it's a planet of interest for us because it used to be very similar to Earth. And so we know where there's signs of water, or life can be sustained. And so we would say, even though the technology is ready to go to Mars, Is the human body ready to go to Mars, right? Is the human body ready to sustain such a journey to another planet? And I think we still have a lot of things to figure out in that realm to sustain human life outside of our Earth.
Coming up next, after blazing the trail for people of color at NASA,
Is it easier for women of your color to now rise through the ranks like you broke through the ranks?
Definitely.
All of the work that you've done in aerospace engineering, and I keep going back to the view, your view of life must be so much more unique, seeing the things that regular day-to-day people don't see from the perspective of looking at this extraordinary planet, looking at this extraordinary space that we occupy.
Yes, the vastness of space. I mean, it blows my mind because I think of how kind of small we are, not just our planet, but we as human beings. When you think of the vastness of the universe, you think of our Earth being one planet in our solar system, and in our galaxy, just our galaxy, which is the Milky Way galaxy, our solar system is one of billions. Our sun is one of billions of suns in just our galaxy. And there are billions of galaxies in the universe. Like, when you think of that, it is mind-blowing. And so it just gives you perspective, right? It just gives you another perspective. And then you come back to Earth and you're like, no, we are Earthlings here. And we have the day-to-day struggles and interactions with other human beings. And, you know, so it's just this dichotomy. It really does. It really does.
Talking about humbles you, you came from humble beginnings in Trinidad and Tobago. You rose through the ranks to work for NASA. It's an amazing story. And I just wonder, you know, when you reflect on your own career, your own journey coming from a small island state in the Caribbean region and ascending to NASA, what have you made of your own journey? Now you're retired, I'm sure you're reflecting.
Oh, I've always been reflective. If it was not for me growing up here, there is a certain sense of confidence and a sense of awareness that I had of myself growing up in Trinidad, being surrounded by leaders, people in positions of authority that look like me. You don't know what that does to your psyche. It gives you a sense of, well, I belong. I could do anything. I belong at the table. I belong in the room. And I think it's a lot of that foundation that I had that really allowed me, gave me the fortitude, the tenacity, the resilience to rise through the ranks at a place like NASA, where most of the people don't look like me, you know? And so you need a certain level of determination and resilience to not just survive in that environment, but thrive in that environment. And I really credit my foundation growing up in Trinidad and Tobago.
You, as you mentioned, as a black woman, you broke many barriers at NASA.
Yeah.
Do you feel now that you've retired that you've sort of made it easier? And is it easier for women of your color to now rise through the ranks like you broke through the ranks?
Definitely, definitely. And I have done a lot of work at the agency to make sure there are others who look like me coming up in the pipeline. It wasn't easy because the systems are not naturally set up for, you know, bringing in diverse talent, but absolutely. And I am always encouraging young people. I'm here for a few days. I'm going to visit a few schools. I insisted because it's important for me to let others know that they could do it. You know, you could pursue your dreams, work hard, be determined, and just go for it, you know.
I want to go back to a point that you made a little bit earlier, because you yourself said almost every country on earth at some point over the next decade or 2 decades will find themselves investing in some way,
Yes.
form, or the other. They may not have a rocket headed
Yes,
towards the
exactly,
moon, but they'll have
exactly.
investment in some way. What does that look like for small islands like us in the Caribbean?
It looks like having a group of students at the university learning to build a cube satellite, a small 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter satellite, integrated into it a camera or some kind of payload that you could launch. And just that training, that development is the road to or the path to more advanced, studies, more advanced, being more involved in high-tech industries like the space industry. So even from that perspective, from a training and development perspective.
You talk about university students. You will meet with several students on your trip
excited.
here. For those watching this interview and seeing that you came from the island that they came from, and they probably aspire to work in the very same field or aspire to even reach the moon like you do,
Yes.
what would you say to them, Camille?
I would say, first of all, have a dream. No dream is too small enough, no matter how audacious it seems. And I remember people used to say, are you crazy? Like, what are you talking about? Space? And you want to be an astronaut? And in my mind, I knew that's what I loved and that's what I wanted to do. And for some reason, I was able to put the blinders on and just heads down and work hard. And so that's what I will tell them. First, have a dream, believe in yourself and your dream, but there is no substitute for hard work. You gotta put in the work. It's important to surround yourself with people who support you in what you're up to. It's important to have mentors who can help you navigate, because it's never a straight road. My career was not a straight road. In fact, you never know. It takes all these winds and turns, but navigating through that is important to have people who can help you, right? And so I would say those are the ingredients. Determination, perseverance. There's no substitute for that.
Camille Wardrop Alleyne, welcome back home, and thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.